Can you tell us how you actually got involved in body mapping?
I went to Yale University School of Music for my master's degree in performance. And I think it was during my second year, one of my buddies, a guy named Philip Stanger, wonderful guitarist, who had studied with Aaron Shearer at Peabody Conservatory here in Baltimore. Philip came in one day and he said, he was watching me play, and he says something about my thumb, and he said, there's actually this joint here of the thumb, and I was like, really? I had no idea. The common misconception for people is that this is the thumb, and that the thumb just kind of meets the palm right there, and that was certainly my conception. Immediately found that it helped my playing. Really set things free, went to a whole new technical level. It was great.
Would you care to hazard a guess about how common injuries are amongst musicians?
Well, there's a lot of data on that.
Have you looked at the data?
Yeah, I'm aware of a number of things that I've come across through the years. The numbers are quite high. In fact, when I was in Boston, one of my colleagues who was a professor at Berkeley, Neil Olmsted is his name, pianist on the piano faculty there, did a survey among the undergraduates, and it was a voluntary and anonymous survey so that they could just be completely honest. They had a rate of 78%, I believe it was. It was in the 75 or higher percentile of the people surveyed, which was random, who admitted to having pain, injury of the kind that required them to stop playing for a time. I've heard, anecdotally, just information of kids even younger than that are starting to have these kinds of problems. Medicine tends to look at things on a purely physical level. If there's a physical problem going on, it's assumed that this is happening in the body solely, that there's a physical problem. In many of these situations where musicians are injured is because of the role of perfectionism. What's driving perfectionism oftentimes is struggles with low self-esteem. And these psychological factors, emotional drivers, end up having very real symptoms in the body that cause pain, and also get into injuries, even injuries as alarming as focal dystonia is.
Is there a scientific proof for body mapping?
It's starting to really gain a lot of momentum because it is in a field. It happens to be in a field where there is research that's happening, and there are medical professionals driving this, and science professionals, scientists that are driving this as well. There's conditions like mind-body syndrome, and interestingly, medicine is starting to come around to this gradually, and it looks like there are going to be studies. There are NIH-funded studies that have shown the effectiveness of diagnosing psychophysiological disorders, treating them as psychogenic, meaning the primary is more emotional or psychological, but it's not all in your head. It actually has very real physical symptoms. Now, going to a regular doctor not trained in mind-body syndrome, you might be encouraged to have a surgery or sent to physical therapy or any number of these sorts of things, which generally don't help at all. Maybe even set people back a bit. So there are a whole range of problems that musicians have that may very well fit into this category of mind-body disorders. Pain, injuries of various sort, including focal dystonia. So given that musicians have a high rate of injury and pain. There can be a great deal of insight and a great deal learned looking at things from the perspective of mind-body syndrome. And it's a very different treatment because the diagnosis is different.
Do you get people coming to you who have got a specific problem, like they think they've got carpal tunnel syndrome or something like that?
Yes, I work with a huge range of people. I work with a lot of people with focal dystonia and have had a great deal of success in helping musicians resolve focal dystonia, and among some notable, well-known players. But aside from dystonia, of course, yeah, people with pain of various sorts I've worked with, and also people that are just feeling stuck, feeling limited, and looking for ways to improve and keep growing.
How common is it for someone to present problems in their hands and you find that the cause is somewhere in their back?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I think I always look to the whole person, the way they're moving as a whole. I really don't think I ever see anybody who has a problem with their hand that's just isolated to the hand.
Mm.
So it's almost always caused by something a long way away.
Yeah, including the brain and what's going on in the brain, as we were talking about a little earlier. Some of the psychogenic properties of how these things manifest.
How important is posture?
Well, it depends on what posture actually is. So, generally speaking, when you say posture to a person, or maybe even a room full of people, you'll see a phenomenon occur which you did not see with me just now when you said posture.
And that would be the suddenly trying to sit up really straight.
Yeah, you would normally say, somebody says posture, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, yeah. In fact, I remember Barbara Conable saying that posture, rigid posture, sit up straight, stand up straight, that kind of stuff, all taught at the dinner table when we were kids. All of that stuff is actually the worst thing for a musician.
Okay, so I'll rephrase my question.
Okay.
How important is good posture? Good being relaxed and balanced.
Right. But again, we have to be very careful around that, because good posture almost makes it worse. In other words, what people think of as good posture is sitting up straight.
Yes.
And rigidifying themselves. As opposed to, from a body mapping point of view, we look at the whole idea of posture, which tends to say things like sitting up straight. And then we say, well, actually, the spine is not straight. The spine itself, as a structure, is curvy. And so really what we do is sit up curvy. We stand up curvy. And our spine is segmented. And so that means that we have a great deal of versatility of movement in all directions. There's this gelatinous material that makes it very springy in the spine. And so when we really start to get down to the whole notion of posture and really confronting what posture means to people, what their conceptions of posture is, then we really have to be careful about even using the word. What I tend to do is not use the word posture. Balance, sitting up in balance, sitting up upright. So different language can bring forth different qualities of movement or different ways of using oneself.
Right.
It's an important topic. It's a very, very important topic, because we're taught posture, we're taught sitting up straight. Musicians are taught to sit up straight.
Right. I'm going to try rephrasing the question again.
Okay.
How important is it that we learn that we use our spine well?
It's essential.
Right.
is so essential because the spine is what coordinates the limbs. So that means that it coordinates both our arms and our legs. And so the spine is the central engine in a way. And if the spine's rigid, then everything's going to be rigid. But if one is moving fluidly in their spine, then the variety of movement is significant. I think that it helps musicians. I don't see anything really inherently wrong with it. It's just if a musician's rigid and they're in these asymmetrical postures, then there can be some very rigid tension patterns that are formed and learned neural pathways around these positions. And that can be harmful. That can definitely be harmful. But if the musician is fluid, if their spine is fluid and they're all the things we talked about a little earlier, then it remains free. There's nothing wrong with having the arms here through the course of a piece or even a practice session. It's just when when we tense up and we tighten, then it starts to become more of a pattern of tension that's learned and can be unlearned. But that's generally where people are struggling from that learned position that they're trying to hold. And if they think in terms of position, that also reinforces the idea.
If you're spending a few hours a day playing an instrument, whatever instrument you're playing, there are certain positions that you're going to have to occupy no matter how much movement you try and put in, because the instrument is always going to be in a similar place relative to you. But now I've forgotten where I was going with that. Yeah, when you spend a couple of hours doing something a day, any habits you're building up are going to stick with you throughout the rest of the day, unless you make a conscious effort to undo those things.
There are guitarists all over who are performing really well and fluidly with the footstool. I was thinking about that and realizing, well, why did I switch? And I realized, and I think this is probably the case for many people, which is that, the reason why I switched originally from a footstool to a thigh support device was that I was having pain. I was having back pain. And so, and I think that that's probably what is the root of it for most anyone who makes that kind of change. They're seeking solutions to some pain that they're having. And so it makes perfect sense to do that. And of course, having both feet on the floor makes a lot of sense, just ergonomics alone. Is there possibly a body mapping reason why I wasn't sitting comfortably with a footstool years ago, and why I went down this road with thigh support devices? And I started to really investigate this a little more. And I started to look at things like the mapping of my hip joints. I realized that with my left thigh, I was only really including the part of the thigh that went to here. Everything that I could see out in front of the guitar was in my awareness when I played the guitar. In classes and in teaching, a room full of guitarists, guitar in hand, I said, could you all please touch everything that you conceive of as your legs? And I would see that same phenomenon. Guitar in hand, guitarists would go, touch, and they'd stop there. And that whole portion of the upper leg bone was not in their map. In the field of somatics, or in particular in the field of body mapping, we see musicians as movers. Musicians move. For professionals, they're moving for a living. And most musicians, if you ask them, do you move for a living? May scratch their heads and think about it for a second. and many of them in the end may say, well, I don't think so. If you ask a dancer, if you ask certainly an athlete, do you move for a living? They would find the question silly and maybe even stupid. and not even say so. That's a really obvious thing. But musicians not. And the fact is that we do move for a living, and our movement is actually more refined, precise, and rapid than any dancer or athletes. Yet, as a culture, as a community, we don't tend to think of it that way. And therefore, it explains why there's really no movement training component that's a part of music training. So that's one of the goals that Barbara Conable laid out, which is that we need to put music training on a secure somatic, meaning body and movement foundation. The kinesthetic sense enables us to perceive movement quality, position, location, and everything. And so one of the things that is put forth, which becomes very, very obvious, is that we do need sensory training, not limited to the part of the senses that is oral training. We have oral theory, obviously, and classes that go on throughout undergraduate and graduate school. And so the point made is that we need to include things like movement training, kinesthetic perception, just basic information that there is this sense. It's an ordinary sense, and it's different than the tactile sense. The kinesthetic sense is never named. It's not among the 5 senses that we're taught in grade school. The main thing that we need to know is that in the muscles and also in the connective tissue, we have these sense organs, the proprioceptors, the kinesthetic receptors, all of these. And once I realized that, okay, so my muscles aren't just these dudes, doing all the heavy lifting, right? It's not just about the muscle that's used to do things. That actually we can think of the muscles as being like the other senses, as smart, as information providing. Give us information that's essential for musicians because of what we do, which is movement. So we need to have that sense of mapping or naming the kinesthetic sense. So that's one of the main basics of any body mapping teacher's work, is to focus on making sure that people have this just basic information that unfortunately is left out of most all basic education, and surprisingly is also left out of music education.
Yes.
Currently, although it'll change.
It is changing. Alexander technique teachers are far more common in music schools, but you've got to be going to the elite places for those.
That's right. Yeah.
Nobody realises that there's actually something behind the fingertips. It's amazing how focused people are on that little bit there.
Right.
It's a big problem.
Yeah, it's, we're missing out on a lot. I mean, obviously, as guitarists, as string players, we rely a lot on the information that's coming from here. So it's still important, but if we put this specific information in playing, our contact with the instrument, everything that we feel in the string and what we notice and how it correlates to the sound and sensation and sound. But if we put all of that into context with the whole body, then there's a lot more potential, expressive potential, artistic and technical potential that we have.
You highlight how it's surprising that you ask a musician if they move for a living, and they don't immediately say yes. But a lot of musicians don't even listen. Obviously, I'm talking about the amateur ones. But they don't even listen to the sound they're making. Why are you learning to play this instrument? You're doing it to please yourself. And how is it pleasing? Because you're creating these sounds and you're not even listening to them. It's amazing how people are just purely focused on getting the notes out. So what the spine is doing is so far removed, it doesn't stand a chance.
It causes folks to make the assumption that all of the problems that they're having are in the fingers because it feels that way, perhaps. And so they begin to concentrate on it and exclusively. And the thing is that as that concentration on fingers, exclusive concentration on fingers increases, then the ability to listen and respond orally diminishes over time. And I believe, and I suspect you might as well, that part of that is because of what's not in the training, what's not in music training. If a person is concentrating really hard on something, that's going to put a lot of strain into practice. And we're taught to concentrate, so inclusive attention helps us remain fluid and at ease as well. So the body mapping of structure, function, and size, correcting misconceptions, leading with those common misconceptions that we have, and then mapping the senses and training sensing, discerning, responding to kinesthetic information as well as the tactile and the oral and the visual information, and learning to integrate all of that. But then also the training of attention, where the way that we use our attention is one that includes a sense of the periphery, the field of awareness, and also a focus that can move fluidly within that wider gestalt. That's very different than a very exclusive, narrow, tight concentration, very dense use of one's attention, which tends to cause muscular strain.
Yeah. I think we tend to think of concentration as being a very tiny point, and concentration being a strain. You've got to like that, but it needs to be much more relaxed and expansive.
Exactly, and it's really what we need as musicians, particularly in the case of chamber music and working with a conductor and things like that. That we have to have the ability to fluidly move attention and the focus be able to move. And when we learn this, we can have habits of the way that we use our attention. But when we learn inclusive attention, it sets movement free, and it enables us to be so much more flexible in music making. Again, this is another example of things that are essential in the training of musicians, because we move for a living, so anything that's going to affect the fluidity of movement and coordination is relevant to what we do. We don't have that. We have no training of attention. The way attention is trained is usually very random, if it's trained at all.
Do you think that there's more of a danger of having this narrow focal range as a solo player, because they don't have to listen out and look out for conductors and other musicians?
Yeah, I think there is more of a tendency to get, as a soloist, to when doing solo work, there's more of that tendency. There's no cueing. There's no moment in there where we're going to cue or take a cue or anything like that. That there are things that would occur just by way of playing chamber music or playing with an orchestra that would happen and develop without even trying to. It would just come about.
How important do you think it is that teachers have knowledge of physiology and causes of injuries and things like that?
I think it's very important. It's also really important that musicians and music teachers, all of us, the whole culture that we're in, that we understand how these things manifest.